Greetings. Today I'm going to be talking about the European Migrant Crisis and why it was bound to happen. This gets back into economics. The European Union has an excessively low birth rate. It's currently around 1.6 for the total fertility rate, and 2.1 is generally considered to be the replacement rate. So the population of Europe is going to shrink, which means a shrinking economic system. And this is something that the monetary system can't have. To start off, if you're not aware, there's a thing called fractional reserve banking. And our monetary system is a lot more complex than this. I'm not going to get into things like shadow banking, which is not some tinfoily conspiracy. It's just lending through non-traditional channels. That's shadow banking. But just basic fractional reserve banking. So if I have $1,000 and my bank has what's called a 10% reserve requirement, and I go deposit my $1,000 into the bank, the 10% reserve requirement means they only need to keep 10% of that on hand under the assumption that I'm never going to come and take all of that $1,000 out at once, and there'll be other customers that have deposited. So, maybe if I want to take a little bit more out, the other customers will make up for it. So they can loan $900 of that $1,000 that I deposited out. So say somebody needs new cabinets, they hire somebody to purchase and install the cabinets for them for $900, and they come pull that $900 out in the form of a loan from my bank. Never works out that cleanly, but that's the basic idea. So they spend their money, and the person, the carpenter who installs the cabinets, he goes and he deposits that money into his bank. Now his bank, if it has a 10% reserve requirement, is allowed to loan out $810. And this process will keep on happening and happening over and over again until there are $10,000 in deposits on the bank's books. Now, these deposits for the banks are considered a liability because they owe the money. It's kind of a perverse thing. When you have the money, it's considered a liability. That should let you know that there's something screwy with banking. But this leads to a situation where you have interest that's being paid on that. And for the consequences of interest on money that's created through creating debt, I'm going to let a fellow named Mike Maloney explain this to you. This is from a video that I've lifted. I highly recommend that you watch this video. It's simplistic about how our system works, and you're going to watch it. And you're going to say, if you haven't been exposed to this stuff before, you're going to say this is simplistic. Yes, it is. But he's doing a big service in 30 minutes. He's explaining a large chunk of our monetary system in 30 minutes, and it's a very complex topic, and he does a fairly good job. So I highly recommend watching the entirety of this video. I'll have a link below. Anyways, here's Mike Maloney explaining the consequences of the interest on our debt-backed money.
But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe $4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments.
Okay, so as you can see, it's our current monetary system is a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. It requires perpetual exponential growth to keep going. This is a problem because we can't have perpetual exponential growth. And exponential growth is one of those issues that you don't think that it's a problem until the very end when it's snuck up on you, because it accelerates. That's the issue. So the European Union, now he was talking about how the US dollar works specifically, but most of what he talked about does apply to the euro. They have the European Central Bank, which buys bonds and does all sorts of stupid shit like that. But it's applicable. Again, I highly, highly recommend watching that video. Like I said, I'll have a link in the description. The video is called The Biggest Scam in the History of Mankind, Hidden Secrets of Money 4. And most of what he talks about is accurate. Any inaccuracies are due to him simplifying it. It's actually much worse when you look at our entire system. So let's move on to the migrant crisis and what the European Union has been doing. Now, as you can see, Commission of the European Communities, that's the precursor to the European Commission. This is Europe's Demographic Future, Facts and Figures. Coming down, now I'm going to scroll down. You can see this is a fairly long document. I haven't looked at all of I haven't looked at all this shit, but I've read most of this document. There are a few things that I skimmed over, but no, I've read most of the document. So we come down to page 6 here. And let me read the introduction to you. Background. Demographic change is high on the European policy agenda, and indeed, Europe has to brace itself for profound changes in its population structure. During the coming decade, the baby boom cohorts will start retiring from the labor market. Young cohorts entering the labor market will be much smaller as a result of low fertility. In about 10 years, total employment in the EU could start to fall in spite of rising employment rates. Europe's potential growth rate could decline at a time when significant additional resources will be required to meet the needs of an increasing number of elderly people for whom adequate pensions and health and long-term care provision will have to be secured. In October 2006, the Commission presented its views on the demographic challenge and the best ways for tackling it in the communication, The Demographic Future of Europe, From Challenge to Opportunity. This communication followed a major public debate launched by the Green Paper, Confronting Demographic Change and New Solidarity Between the Generations of March 2005, as well as discussions at the level of heads of state and government in the Hampton Court Informal Summit of October 2005. The Commission expressed confidence in Europe's ability to cope with the demographic challenge and presented 5 key areas in which there are major opportunities for constructive policy responses. Promoting demographic renewal in Europe, promoting employment in Europe, more jobs and longer working lives, better quality. So in other words, people are going to have to wait longer to retire. A more productive and dynamic Europe, that's just a general kind of gobbledygook statement that, we're going to be more productive. Okay, how? Receiving and integrating migrants in Europe. And, here it is right here. They're talking about it 2007, and they've talked about it earlier than that. The earliest that I've actually paid attention to is around 2005, but I guarantee they were talking about this in the 80s or 90s when this obvious demographic issue it was clear that it was going to happen. Okay, sustainable public finances to guarantee adequate social protection and equity between the generations. Okay, so as you should be gathering right now, there is no such thing as sustainable public finances under a fiat monetary system. The debt has to grow. So countries have to spend it can't happen. So there you have it. They're talking about they're talking about immigration already. They say there's other issues, but it goes on, and it talks about fertility. Let's see here. Regarding fertility, there are roughly 2 groups of countries within the EU. Those with the moderately low fertility in the range of 1.6 to 1.9. Again, 2.1 is considered the general replacement rate. 1.6 to 1.9 births per woman, and those with very low fertility in the range of 1.5 births or less. The average for the EU 25 is 1.5. That's for 2005. Today it's 1.6. The fertility rate needed for a full replacement of generations is estimated by demographers to be 2.1, but given current levels of migration and rising life expectancy, the population size will decline only at fertility rates significantly below this replacement rate. Currently observed fertility rates may also underestimate long-term trends. The indicator is constructed in such a way that postponement of childbearing will initially lead to a lower fertility rate until the mother's new higher average age at birth is reached. This tempo effect may be affecting countries with the lowest birth rates, notably in Central and Eastern Europe. The Eurostat population projections up to 2050 assume an increase in fertility rates, particularly in countries with the lowest rates. For the EU 25, a slight recovery from 1.5 to 1.6 is assumed, and at least currently that slight recovery has happened. A Eurobarometer survey carried out in 2006 revealed a generally positive attitude of Europeans towards childbearing. Women would like to have more children than they actually have. Moreover, they would also prefer to have their children at somewhat later in life than they actually do. So, yeah, it's just saying low birth rate, low birth rate, low birth rate. Keep that in mind when keep the fiat currency and the whole Ponzi scheme in mind with the low birth rate. I mean, it is incredibly important. More productive and dynamic. Okay, receiving and integrating migrants in Europe. Europe will continue to be an attractive destination for migrants due to its prosperity and well-functioning societies. However, it should be noted that the EU is not as successful as the USA or Canada in attracting the highest skilled migrants. The procedure adopted in 2005 for the admission of third country researchers is a first step towards addressing this issue. Such arrangements need not come at the cost of developing countries in the form of a brain drain, but can and should be beneficial to all parties. Around 3.7% of the EU 27 population are non-EU nationals, 5.1% in the EU 15. Migration is therefore already responding to the needs of the European labor markets, and this need for both high and low-skilled migrant labor will continue. While internal mobility of workers within the EU will not change demographic trends for the EU as a whole, it does represent an enormous potential for higher rates of participation in employment as it opens up better opportunities for people living in regions where they face poor labor market prospects. Countries that have experienced rapid economic growth over recent years, like Spain and Ireland, have clearly benefited enormously from the significant inflow of workers, both from outside and from within the European Union. Okay, Spain and Ireland, two of the pigs. Now, these countries have since had massive economic problems, starting with the housing crisis that kind of shuttered around the world, and I haven't read the details about that in several years, so they're a little fuzzy on me, but Spain and Ireland have massive economic problems structurally. So do Italy and Portugal and Greece. They're all kind of in the same boat. Some are worse than others. So saying that it benefited enormously from this main flow of immigrants is kind of funny because it blew up in their faces. And I'm not saying it was the immigration that blew up in their faces, but their economies blew up in their faces within the next year or two after that. So the main challenge to realizing the potential of immigration is the integration of migrants and their descendants into European societies. Okay, that's exactly what's not fucking happening right now. The member states of the EU have evidently had different degrees of success with labor market and social integration. So yeah, if they're more European or they're American or Canadian or Australian or something, they're going to integrate just fine. It's when you have people from third world countries who bring the third world with them. In fact, you really ought to go look up IQ by country, and you see why third world countries are going to remain third world countries for a long time. And unless you have this selection that does wind up being brain drain on these countries, they're going to bring the third world with them when they migrate en masse. The educational attainment of non-nationals is generally substantially lower than that of nationals, although in several member states the percentage of non-nationals with tertiary level education is actually higher than that of nationals. At the same time, in several member states, the employment rates of migrants, particularly migrant women, are very low. Linked to this insufficient integration of migrants in the host societies is a rather negative perception of integration. Eurobarometer results indicate that on average only 4 out of 10 EU citizens feel that immigrants contribute a lot to their country, while a slight majority of citizens do not agree with this statement. So, even back then, before the whole immigrant crisis hit, this just was it wasn't going to be that popular. People don't like a lot of foreigners coming into their country. They'll handle a few, but they don't like a lot coming in and changing the culture and doing things different. It's just one of those things that was guaranteed to not work as well as you would want. So here's another one. Apart from future expenditure and revenue trends, the long-term sustainability of public finances depends on the current deficit and debt situation, which, if left unchanged, can put public finances on an unsustainable path. They were on an unsustainable path as soon as you went to a fucking fiat currency that is created by debt fundamentally. Interest payments on public debt can represent more than 10% of public revenue in some member states, Greece. Reducing current deficit and debt levels and avoiding unsustainable expenditure trends are recommended policies to ensure that member states remain capable of meeting future spending needs, including those arising from population aging. The potential for further consolidation of public finances differs greatly across member states. So they're worried about their finances, but they have a currency that's based on fucking debt. I mean, I would say I don't get it, but I do. They just don't want to get it. Okay, so the demographic transition paradigm. Explanations and projections of population trends in different parts of the world have been generally guided by the paradigm of demographic transition. This term was first used by the American demographer Warren Thompson in 1929 to label the changes or transitions he observed in birth and death rates in industrialized societies over the past 200 years. There always appears to be a common pattern. After an initial decline of death rates, birth rates also start to fall, albeit with a certain lag. During this time lag, birth rates will be much higher than mortality rates, resulting in a rapidly growing population. This paradigm fits well in the remarkable mortality and fertility changes that happened first in Europe in the 19th century and in much of the rest of the world during the 20th century. The transition can be broken down into 4 different phases. Stage 1 corresponds to pre-modern times and is characterized by the absence of a clear population trend. During the second stage, there is a dramatic rise in population caused by a decline in the death rate while the birth rate remains high. The decline in the death rate is due to improvements in food supply thanks to higher yields in agriculture and to improvements in public health, water and food handling hygienic conditions, which result in particularly pronounced decrease in childhood mortality. The increasing survival of children leads to a younger population structure. The trend is amplified as the larger surviving cohorts start to have children of their own at the same high fertility rate as their parents. During stage 3, the birth rate declines, which moves the population back towards stability. In most northern European countries, such a decline in birth rates already started at the end of the 19th century. Towards the end of stage 3, the fertility rate falls to replacement levels, but as a result of population momentum, i.e. the large number of young people, the population continues to grow. Finally, stage 4 is characterized once again by stability, with the population no longer growing and the population age structure has become much older. Such a demographic transition seems to be a common feature of development across the world, although there are important differences in timing between various regions. In the 1950s, birth rates in Europe were almost twice as high as the death rates, which resulted in significant population growth. It was during the 1990s that Europe entered stage 4 when the gap between birth and death rates closed. Europe then started to have a birth deficit resulting in negative natural growth. Consequently, any further population growth has been the result of net immigration. Less developed regions of the world are by and large still in stage 3 of their demographic transition. Death rates have already declined significantly and birth rates are now also coming down, albeit from a very high level. India is expected to complete its demographic transition by the middle of this century. The only region in the world where birth rates have not yet come down is sub-Saharan Africa. Now, that's where a lot of the immigration pressure is going to be on Europe in the future. It's already started, but it's just a trickle compared to how many people are going to be wanting to get into Europe in the future. According to Macron, the French president, he's saying like 100 to 200 million of them are going to want to come in, and that will absolutely crush Europe. But so sub-Saharan Africa, which still appears to be in stage 2 of the demographic transition, yeah, their birth rate's up around like 5 versus the 2.1. Here, the population is growing fast, even though the decrease in death rates has recently slowed due to the fact that in several African countries, mortality has actually increased as a result of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Okay, so yeah, they're basically what they're talking about is just natural cycles of when things get really good, populations tend to increase until they get up to a certain point, and then they kind of hit a wall, and then the population gets older. And again, keep in mind that we have a monetary system that requires perpetual exponential growth. It also allows politicians to promise a bunch of shit to a bunch of people that, you know, when these kinds of things play out, people aren't going to get that shit. So fiat currency plus you need a central bank to run this kind of scam. But fiat currency allows politicians to promise a bunch of shit to a bunch of people. Don't forget about that. And a bunch of shit has been promised to the European population. Let's come down here. Within the EU, there are roughly 2 groups of countries. Those with the moderately low fertility in the range of 1.6 to 1.9 births per woman, and those with very low fertility, 1.5 births or less. The difference may appear small at first glance, however, it has major implications for a country's long-term demographic future. The Australian demographer Peter MacDonald has warned that in a stable population with a fertility rate of 1.3 births per woman, the population falls at a rate of 1.5% per annum. Such a population in 100 years would, all other things remaining equal, fall to less than a quarter of its original size. In contrast, with a fertility rate of 1.9, the rate of decline in a stable population is only 0.2% per annum, and the population size after 100 years would be 82% of its original size. So this is the opposite of exponential growth. It's like exponential shrinkage. It's e to the minus x. MacDonald concludes that it's an error to convey the impression that in the long run of history, a fertility rate of 1.3 and a fertility rate of 1.9 is much the same thing. Fertility falls from 1.9 to 1.3 through 60% of all women having one fewer child. On the basis of this argument, a distinction is made between countries with a dangerously low fertility rate of below 1.6 and countries with a comfortably low fertility rate. The latter countries can still expect to offset their natural population decline with a reasonable level of immigration. So again, there you have it. Immigration. Got to get that birth rate up. We can't have a monetary system that'll allow a little bit of shrinkage. You know, grow. Mean, actual, and ideal number of children by country. Women aged 25 to 39. So yeah, the darker colored bars here, as you can see, are the actual number of children versus how many number of children women actually want to have in these countries. And you can see there is a discrepancy. And you can ask why that discrepancy is. It's a perfectly reasonable question. It does get into it a little bit here in the future. So the aging of the population also entails the aging of the workforce, as well as an imminent decline in both the workforce and the population. According to the latest Eurostat population projection, the population aged 15 to 64 is going to decrease by 1 million annually after 2010. So we're already in that phase. It's 2018 right now. These trends are likely to generate major labor market bottlenecks and skills shortages, which will act as a major pull factor for international migration into the European Union. At the same time, the continuing high population growth in Europe's neighborhood especially in Africa, so neighborhood, not Europe itself, but especially in Africa, combined with the poor economic performance and political instability, could act as a strong push factor. We're already seeing that. We're seeing a bunch of sub-Saharan Africans going into Libya and crossing the Mediterranean to get into Italy and Greece and places like that. So this is already there. Now, the ones that don't get out of Libya fast enough, a lot of them are being pushed into actual slavery. There are open-air slave markets where you can go buy another human being. Now, like I say, I brought up the IQ versus country. Just because these people are stupid doesn't mean that they deserve to be enslaved. Okay, this is a major problem for the future of Europe. Figures from the year 2000 show a total GDP for the EU almost 10 times greater than the combined GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. Well, no shit. In comparison, GDP for North America was approximately 3 times larger than that of Central and South America, and the estimates that I've seen for the U.S. is that we have 11 million illegal immigrants. More migration is also likely to follow as a result of globalization and the creation of transnational communities. Interestingly, the gender imbalance of the international labor migration seems to be shifting, with male domination around 2/3, falling in most countries, signaling the pull effect of the increasing feminization of labor markets in the developed world. So, if I'm understanding that correctly, so male domination falling in most countries, most of the migrants that we've seen from like Syria and shit have actually been male. Okay, relative contribution of migration and fertility to population growth. Although international migration may play a crucial role in solving future labor market shortages, its impact on population aging is likely to be small. Scenario calculations by the United Nations have shown that to halt, let alone reverse, population aging, truly massive and increasing flows of young migrants would be required. For example, to keep the age structure in Germany unchanged, over 3 million migrants per year would have to be admitted. 3 million, that's a big one. Clearly, increasing immigration cannot prevent aging, but it can realistically contribute to alleviating labor market bottlenecks. So, yeah, they're saying to keep the age structure in Germany the same, you need over 3 million migrants a year. How many did Merkel let in with that big wave? Was it like 1 million? And look at how many problems that caused. Yeah, I mean, it's just insane what's going on over there. It's admitting all those immigrants thinking that they're going to be the same as Europeans once they magically get onto European soil. It's like, yeah, it's not going to work that way. Here's where it gets into fertility rates in the baseline scenario are assumed to rise from 1.5 in 2004 to 1.6 by 2030. Okay, they've actually achieved that. It's what it looks like. Now, will it stay that way? I have no idea. And to stay constant around that level until 2050. Fewer births eventually translate into smaller cohorts of young persons entering the labor market, especially when compared to the much larger, older cohorts leaving for retirement. Net migration inflows are assumed, on average, to fall from an estimated 1.3 million people in 2004 to some 800,000 people annually between 2015 and 2050. Well, it's kind of gone the opposite here recently. We'll see how that keeps up. Although net inflows of migrants are projected to accumulate to some 40 million people between 2004 and 2050, they are insufficient to prevent population decline, let alone stabilize the age structure of the population. These demographic forces will cause the total population in the EU 27 in 2050 to be slightly smaller and much older. I mean, yeah, it's a natural cycle, but you've got this grow monetary system that doesn't let you do anything else. The regional dimension of population change. While it may still be 1 or 2 decades before the impact of aging becomes clearly visible at the level of an entire country, the impact of aging and population decline, notably due to migration, can already be observed at the regional level. The main recent trends identified by Eurostat at regional level can be summarized as follows. In the northeast of the European Union, the population is decreasing. Most affected by this decline are Eastern Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, the 3 Baltic states, and parts of Sweden and Finland. And notice that Germany and Sweden really have taken a lot of migrants during this. Many EU regions have been experiencing a negative natural population change since the beginning of the decade, i.e. more people have died than have been born. This negative pattern predominates in Germany, there it is again, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, and adjacent regions, as well as in the Baltic states and Sweden to the north and Greece in the south. Ireland, France, and the three Benelux countries and Denmark are mostly experiencing a natural increase in the population. So yeah, they're having plenty of babies. Now with France, I have to wonder how much of that is the previous migrant population, people who are migrated 10 or 15 years ago or are perhaps second or third generation migrant from outside of the Eurozone. In some regions, a negative natural change has been offset by positive net migration. This is most conspicuous in Western Germany, Eastern Austria, the north of Italy, Slovenia, as well as the south of Sweden and regions in Spain, Greece, and the United Kingdom. The opposite is much rarer. In only a few regions, namely the north of Poland, has a positive natural change been offset by a negative net migration. So population trends and challenges in Europe's neighborhood. The Mediterranean Sea represents one of the sharpest demographic divides in the world. Greece, Italy, and Spain, which have among the lowest fertility rates, are aging rapidly and will see their populations shrink, while the countries on the southern rim have some of the most rapidly growing populations. Although fertility rates have been falling in northern Africa, its population is still growing fast due to the population momentum generated by the very young age structure. A comparison of population trends in Italy and Egypt over a 100-year period is very striking. In 1950, Egypt had less than half the population size of Italy, but the population grew so fast that by the early 1990s, both countries were of equal size. Over the coming decades, Italy is expected to start shrinking, while Egypt will continue its rapid population growth. The fertility decline in Egypt seems to have slowed, or even stalled, at a level above 3 children per woman. But even if the decline continues, Egypt's population may still double so that by 2050 it is likely to be about 3 times that of Italy. On the eastern border of the EU, the situation is very different. There are huge income differences compared with the EU, but the demographic trends are quite similar. In most Eastern European countries, the political and economic transition since 1990 has caused very rapid decline in fertility to levels that are even lower than those of the new member states. In addition, these countries are confronted with net migration losses, which means that they face the prospect of significant shrinking and aging of their populations. Okay, so going back up to this Egypt thing up here, that basically what they're saying is, gee, look at this third world country. There's going to be a huge population. Guess where it's going to want to go? It's going to want to go to Europe. I mean, it's kind of being set up for that. The demographic contrast between Europe and its southern neighbors strongly suggests that strong migratory pressures will persist over the coming decades, and we're already seeing that. The differences in expected population growth combined with huge differences in standards of living constitute a strong push factor for immigration towards the EU. Yes, and you guys pay them welfare to come into your countries. They're an economic drag. In the Eastern European countries, a comparable demographic push factor does not exist, but significant migration flows could result from dissatisfaction with economic and political conditions. Now, the Eastern Europeans are less third worldy in their culture. They don't have Islam and the whole tribalism and the marrying of their first cousin things as much, so they would probably be preferable to the third world immigrants who are going to bring the third world with them when they immigrate. So, employment trends. Although the population of working age, aged 15 to 64, is already expected to decline from 2011 onwards, total employment of the EU 25 is expected to grow up to 2017. That was last year, thanks to rising labor force participation. Now, I went where I could see labor force participation on the Federal Reserve's Fred system. It stops at around second or third quarter of 2012. I wonder why. But employment rates can be seen all the way up to 2016 or 2017. That seems odd to me. But according to the projection, which is based on current policies, The overall employment rate of the EU 25 would rise from 63% in 2004 to 67% by 2010 and to 70% by 2020. Now, I guarantee they didn't hit that because of the 2008 financial crisis. The EU would thus reach the overall Lisbon employment target, but 10 years behind schedule. The projected increase in employment will occur for two main reasons. Female employment rates are projected to rise from just over 55% in 2004 to almost 65% in 2025, remaining stable thereafter. The increase will come for the most part from cohort effects. Older women with low participation rates will be replaced by younger women with a higher educational attainment and consequently a stronger attachment to the labor market. Furthermore, policies to increase the availability of childcare and other family-friendly measures will also have a positive effect. Yeah, more women in the workforce. They're saying, oh, we can put childcare facilities into the workplace, and that'll get our rate up. Well, it went up to 1.6, which is still below the replacement rate. If you want to have more kids, you basically need to have women who can leave the workforce, because kids take a lot of time and money. The employment rates of older workers are projected to increase massively from 40% in 2004 for the EU 25 to 47% by 2010 and 59% in 2025. I looked a little bit and couldn't find this readily available. I didn't look very hard to compare, what their projections are to what's actually happened. But I do expect that the older, 65 plus crowd will show an increased presence in the workplace, just because people are living longer and there are all these huge social systems. People just can't retire. They don't want to subsist on Alpo soufflé. This increase in the employment rate of older workers observed since 2000 marks a significant reversal of the decades-long trend towards earlier withdrawal from the labor force. Older workers have accounted for 3/4 of all employment growth in the EU. And I believe that based on what's happened in the United States for similar reasons. In recent years, and about half of the projected increase is due to the positive effects of recent pension reforms that have curtailed access to early retirement schemes and improved financial incentives for older workers to remain in the labor market. Yeah, I mean, if you want all of these retirement goodies and people are going to live longer, all these goodies that they've been promised by politicians who have access to this fiat currency, they're going to have to work longer. It's just that, live longer, you have to work longer. It sucks, but that's the way it is. Challenges to public finances and intergenerational solidarity. To challenge the challenge of demographic aging not only consists in ensuring that Europe's economy can continue to grow thanks to higher labor force participation and strong productivity growth. Continue to grow. Again, fiat currency requires perpetual exponential growth. This cannot continue forever on a finite planet. It's just the way it works. And you don't realize it's a problem until it's too late almost when it comes to exponential growth, because, it's just really slow, really slow, really slow, really slow. It's speeding up a little bit, and all of a sudden it's going faster than you can deal with. The issue of a declining working age population may be less difficult to tackle than the problem of providing adequate resources for an increasing number of old people who need adequate pensions and health care and long-term care. The changes in demography therefore constitute a major challenge for public finances and social cohesion, which is illustrated by the fact that in 2050 there will be 2 working age people per elderly citizen as opposed to the current ratio of 4-to-1. So, I suppose in the past, before all of this, pensions and everything, the kids would have been on the farm or wherever it was that somebody worked, and they would have taken care of their parents. Their parents, when they were too old to work the fields, they would have sat on the porch and done something that they could have done, like shelling beans or some shit. Perfectly acceptable way. And we may wind up going back to that kind of model in the future. We'll see. The long-term projections carried out by the Economic Policy Committee and the European Commission show that the pension, health, and long-term care costs linked with the aging population will lead to significant increases in public spending in most member states by 2050. Many member states have already carried out reforms which put them on the path to greater sustainability. Bullshit. They're still running on fiat currency, which is a goddamn Ponzi scheme. but substantially increased expenditure on pensions is still projected for some countries. On the basis of current policies, total age-related public expenditure is projected to increase by 3.4 percentage points of GDP, while expenditure on pensions, health, and long-term care alone is projected to increase by 4.4 percentage points for the EU 25 and up to 10 percentage points for some member states. And I think it's going to increase more than that. I mean, governments always are over-optimistic when doing this shit. So expect it to be worse than that in actuality. Health and long-term care. The probability of needing health and long-term care increases with age, with most care needs concentrating during the final years of life. So yeah, people are living longer. You know, it's the wheelchair kidney dialysis days that cost the health system the most, not the earlier days. So if you're a smoker or you're a fatty smoker, you're probably going to die before those days. And even though, you know, on a day-to-day basis, you'll cost the healthcare system more, you're going to cost the healthcare system less over the course of your life because you're probably going to die sooner. So that little tangent aside, the main consumers of health and long-term care are therefore people over 80 whose share in the total population, according to the Eurostat population projection, will rise from 4.1% in 2005 to 6.3% in 2025 and to 11.4% in 2050, mainly due to further increases in life expectancy, falls in fertility rates, and the effect of the baby boom generation reaching old age. The number of 80 plus in the EU 25 is projected to grow by 58% between 2005 and 2025. So yeah, I mean, the population's just going to continue to get older as medical care increases and people just quit dying. Opportunities for tackling demographic change. In its communication on the demographic future of Europe, From Challenge to Opportunity, the Commission presented a constructive response to the demographic challenge and highlighted 5 policy areas which member states can take measures to tackle this challenge. The areas are demographic renewal, i.e., lifting the obstacles to a return to higher fertility rates. Again, you know, it went from 1.5 to 1.6. You know, I mean, yeah, that'll make a difference, but not a huge difference. Raising employment levels, which will result in better balance between active and inactive people. So in other words, you don't get to fucking retire as soon, Europeans. Boosting productivity growth, and hence the economy's ability to meet with the needs of an aging population. You know, one way to boost productivity is through automation, but that lowers the employment levels of non-skilled workers. So, I mean, that could be at loggerheads. Receiving and integrating immigrants so as to avoid future labor shortages. Boy, are they receiving immigrants, but they don't seem to be very good at labor. And ensuring the sustainability of public finances and thus securing the ability to maintain adequate social protection and public services in the future. You know, again, fiat currency, it's guaranteed to fail. The question is just when. I mean, is it going to be in a year or is it going to be in 20 years? I don't know, but it'll it'll happen during my expected lifetime. This chapter examines how much scope there is for improvement in each of these 5 areas and provides some indications as to the obstacles that need to be overcome to unlock the potential for tackling the demographic challenge. Clearly, combinations of the measures in the several of these areas are needed, but each member state has different potentials in each of these areas and will therefore require its own specific policy mix. The data presented with this chapter should allow each member state to identify the areas with the greatest scope for improvement and to define policy priorities accordingly. Demographic renewal. How much scope is there for increased fertility? The Commission's communication on the demographic future of Europe has stressed that member states can respond to low birth rates and that such reactions are both necessary and realistic. The necessity stems from the fact that people generally would like to have more children than they actually have. That a policy response to low birth rates is realistic is demonstrated by international comparisons underlining the effectiveness of policies to support those who wish to have children. Potential for more births. In all EU member states, the fertility rate has declined to a level below the replacement level of 2.1, and the EU average is just below 1.5. Again, you know, this paper was written in 2007, and now the average is about 1.6, which is about where they were projecting. I'm actually amazed that they got that projection right. This means roughly that every generation is replaced by a generation that is 25% smaller. At the same time, there are large differences in fertility levels in member states. Wait, actually I'm not surprised given all of the migrants that they've taken, and those migrants bring their third world culture, which involves having lots of kids. So actually I'm not surprised. Two groups that can be distinguished. On one hand, there are countries with fertility rates above 1.6, e.g. France, the UK, blah, 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 which, given rising life expectancy and continuing migration, will prevent population decline. In most other member states, however, fertility rates do not exceed 1.5, implying that population decline seems inevitable. To return to higher fertility rates would not prevent the accelerated aging resulting from the baby boom cohorts growing old. Moreover, with rising life expectancy, a constant old age dependency ratio could only be achieved by fertility rates well above the replacement level, and this would mean a continuous population growth. Higher fertility rates will eventually result in a large labor force, but this takes about 20 years, i.e. the time it takes for those cohorts to go through the education system and enter the labor market. In other words, it takes a long time, and about 10 years after this paper was written, the pressure is on Europe to do something about their economic growth, and gee, here's this wave of migrants, let's let them all in. Like I say, it's not take all these migrants because we're so kind. It's take all these migrants because we don't know what the fuck to do with our economy. It has to grow, and if it doesn't, we're fucked. Oh, the migrants will help it grow. Turns out, no, they won't. Unlocking the potential for more births. Now, I'll tell you right now, if you want more births, you need the government in the European Union to get the fuck out of a lot of things to make life a lot less complex and a lot cheaper so that people can actually afford to have kids. It's that simple. Shrink the fucking government and people will start having more kids. But the Europeans not going to do that because that would be willingly giving up their power. Okay, so anyways, here's what they say. Public policy matters when trying to understand differences in fertility. It can create better conditions for funding a family, raising children, reconciling work and family life, as well as sharing family and domestic responsibilities between women and men. Clearly, some member states have already found relatively successful policy mixes. Children are costly in terms of both direct costs and foregone earnings. These costs create considerable income differences between otherwise comparable couples and without children. Social protection benefits compensate for the direct and indirect costs of having children. According to the Eurostat data on social protection expenditure, which do not include tax benefits, about 3/4 of social protection benefits targeted at families take the form of benefits in cash. In 2004, they amounted to some 1.5% of GDP for the EU 25, ranging from 0.4% in Spain to more than 3% in Luxembourg. Benefits in kind amounted to 0.6% of GDP, with an even larger variation across countries. These differences become larger when one corrects for the fact that the share of young people differs between countries. So in other words, pay people to have kids. It's like, no, make life way the fuck less expensive and people will start having kids. If it's easy to afford all the food that you need and the medical care, and they are paying for the medical care in the Eurozone and the European Union. I mean, they really are. They just don't see when they get the bill, it's from the tax man. That's basically what it boils down to. They don't get a bill from the hospital. They get a bill from the tax man. And so they don't think they're paying for it. And yeah, they're paying out the nose. I mean, I know so are we. We're actually worse. Just to conclude the whole birth rate thing, I skipped a whole bunch. There's convincing evidence that better conditions for families, no shit, increased gender equality, higher female employment, and more support for those who would like to start a family would have a positive impact on fertility rates in the EU. However, it should also be clear that the imminent challenge of demographic aging cannot be addressed by raising the fertility rates. Higher fertility rates will affect the balance between active and retired people only after 2 decades at least. Before that, significant investment in the education of these additional children will be required. So in other words, they're going to be an economic drag for 2 decades before they start putting back into the system. And all these old people who've been promised these great pensions and health care are going to need it now. So the idea is going to be, okay, so 10 years after this paper was written, they're going to let a shitload of immigrants in thinking that it's going to boost the economy, and it's not. I guarantee the immigrants that they're getting or a drag on the economy overall. However, helping people to achieve their goal of starting a family and raising children is now recognized as an important policy goal. The Barcelona target of access to childcare and the Commission's Gender Equality Roadmap and the Member States' European Pact for Gender Equality specifically address the need to further support gender equality policies, including better work-life balance measures, to help meet the demographic challenge. I'm sorry, I'm all for equal protection under the law for men and women, but what they're talking about with gender equality, it's not going to do what they think it's going to do. They're going to say, yeah, we have this evidence that it raises birth rates. It's like, I guarantee birth rates were higher when there was less gender equality. So you need to look at the economic conditions that allow higher birth rates. So now we're back on to immigrants instead of low birth rates, receiving and integrating immigrants in Europe. The communication on the demographic future of Europe emphasized the importance of continued immigration. This will be necessary to meet the needs of the European labor market, both for qualified and unskilled labor. Europe's prosperity and political stability, along with the dynamic population growth in neighboring countries, will ensure that immigration can at least partially offset the decline in Europe's potential labor force due to large cohorts retiring from the labor market and small young cohorts entering it. However, the communication also stressed the importance of integrating immigrants and respecting the needs of their countries of origin. The potential of migration for redressing labor market imbalances. For more than 2 centuries, most countries of Europe have primarily been countries of emigration, but the last 60 years have seen all countries of Western Europe gradually become destinations for international migrants and asylum seekers. Today, all Western European countries and several Central European member states of the European Union have a positive migration balance. Over recent years, net migration into the enlarged EU appears to have exceeded migration into other traditional recipient nations, such as the United States of America. It's only going to get worse. Okay, so this ought to get you. Around 56 million persons entering the country and finding jobs would be needed to compensate for the projected reduction in population of working age for the EU 27. Some countries, typically those with the highest projected fertility rates, such as Ireland, would not need additional labor in order to maintain current job levels. Other member states would require dramatic numbers of immigrants. Germany, Spain, Italy, and Poland. At least Poland's telling everybody to fuck off. All in all, net migration well above the European levels of recent decades would be necessary to compensate for the decline in working age population. However, migrant inflows have varied dramatically in recent years across member states, with countries bordering the Mediterranean receiving vastly greater influx of migrants in absolute terms than other areas of the EU. So in other words, they're receiving migrants from the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, 2 Euro area countries that experienced growth appreciably above the Euro area average during the period of 1999 to 2005, namely Ireland and Spain, again, 2 of the pigs, illustrate the importance of migration. No, they don't. Neither of the 2 countries could have achieved such strong economic and employment growth without a massive inflow of foreign workers. No, they did it by cooking the fucking books. Their bankers cooked the fucking books, and they got a bunch of fraudulent growth, and it looked really good on paper until it all crashed. Estimates of the natural growth in population and the number of migrants entering those 2 countries show that immigration has made a substantial contribution to the increased number of employed, although this contribution has been more modest in the case of Spain than for Ireland. While Spain has mainly had immigration from outside the EU, Ireland has benefited strongly from immigration in other member states, particularly the EU 10. So yeah, total change in employment. You can see the numbers right there for yourself. Like I say, a lot of the miraculous growth was from cooking the books, because bankers tend to be kind of crooked. And I don't mean all bankers. I don't mean your teller. I mean your bigwig bankers. They're just running the largest scams in human history. But unsuccessful integration may be the result of unwelcoming attitudes to immigration and migrants, which may in turn be reinforced by the social problems linked to poor integration of migrants. No shit. People in Europe are starting to get pissed, and the governments are starting to crack down on this. This may make it politically unacceptable to receive more immigrants. Eurobarometer survey results indicate that on average only 4 out of 10 EU citizens feel that immigrants contribute a lot to their country, while a majority of citizens, 52%, do not agree with this sentiment. However, there are significant differences between countries. While fully 79% of Swedes have a positive opinion of the contribution of immigrants to society, only 12% of Slovaks hold this view. So the Swedes were cucks back then too. Looks like they've gotten even worse. Okay, so sound public finances can be seriously undermined by the level of interest payments as a percentage of total government revenue. So yeah, we're back on this too. Too high a level of interest payments due to past mistakes and budget policy is an additional challenge that needs to be overcome in order to arrive at long-term sustainability. In the mid-1990s, Italy's used more than a quarter of government revenue to service its public debt, and Greece 1/3. Since then, interest payments have gone down considerably, albeit not primarily as a result of debt reduction, but rather thanks to the lower interest rates that made it possible by the introduction of the euro. In 2005, Italy and Greece spent 11% and 13% respectively of their public revenue on interest payments. Yeah, so that's since blown up, and a lot of countries in Europe have gone to NIRP, negative interest rate policies. So this is not an example of something going good. It's an example of fiat currency being held together with duct tape and baling wire. This is still a large amount of money that would otherwise go a long way towards meeting future aging-related needs, or could be used for investing in education, research and development, better support for families, or new infrastructure, thereby laying the foundations for future growth. Yeah, but then the central banks and the bankers couldn't get their fucking cut of the profits. And I know I swapped back to a different topic, but it's just the order of this document. But I'm going to get to the conclusion here. So, but anyways, here's the overall conclusion from this report. This report has highlighted how much potential there is for tackling the demographic challenge in 5 key areas, which obstacles would need to be overcome to unlock this potential. Action in one field alone is unlikely to be sufficient, and a mix of policies will be required. While this report mainly focuses on mitigating the impact of the challenge through increasing the overall size of the workforce, a wide range of other issues are also relevant for meeting the demographic challenge and seizing opportunities. For instance, one important issue not dealt with in this report is the impact of demographic change on environment. Further analysis is also required of aging, and we need to improve the European market for long-term savings products. That's not going to happen in the future for you guys. The effects of migration would also deserve further analysis. Yep, no shit. Subsequent reports to be published in connection with each future European Demography Forum will touch in more detail on these and other subjects so as to support the informed and constructive debate at both at the European level and in the member states. Nevertheless, the very cursory analysis presented above confirms the confident tone of the Commission regarding the demographic future of Europe. It is possible to tackle this demographic challenge provided the window of opportunity of the next 10 years is used. Okay, so remember, that was 2007, so 2017 marked 10 years. We're in 2018 already. We're 11 years past that. Now, when did the migrant crisis happen, you ask? I have to wonder if the European Commission and Angela Merkel, and they all thought that letting all of these immigrants in was the right thing to do to bolster their workforce. I can guarantee it wasn't. I can guarantee that with the large communities of third world immigrants organizing around their own cultures, they're not going to integrate, and they're going to be a net drain on the economic system in Europe. They're going to cause the opposite of what Europeans would like them to do, what the EU would like them to do. Now, some people talk about the cultural replacement and the cultural Marxists, and I certainly do think that exists, but I think that this at the very least started and is being driven by our monetary system, which requires perpetual exponential growth, and European birth rates are 1.6 when the replacement rate is 2.1. This is a period during which Europe can still count on the active involvement of the baby boom cohorts and other factors such as rising employment amongst women. A spirit of intergenerational solidarity and advancement of equal opportunities will therefore be crucial elements in exploiting this opportunity. So, yeah, 10 years from 2007, they need to have these issues solved. They don't have them solved. And in fact, the migration issue is actually going to make things worse for them. And if you listen to Macron, the French president, he thinks that there's like 150 to 200 million sub-Saharan Africans that are going to want to get into Europe over the next coming years. Europe cannot support that. It's going to have to rethink its position on its monetary system. It's going to have to rethink its position on immigration, and it's going to have to reconsider its position on perpetual exponential growth. Like I say, perpetual exponential growth, it doesn't look like it's a problem until all of a sudden it's a huge fucking problem in your face. In explaining perpetual exponential growth, the issue with it is say you're in a room that there's a leak in a pipe, and this is a sealed room except for a little air vent that lets air out at the top that you can't get through. Now this leak, every minute, it doubles in how fast the water's coming out. So doubles, it doubles, it doubles, and at the end of 1 hour, the room's going to be full. Now you're trapped in here. At what minute is the room going to be half full? And the answer to that is minute 59. At 5 minutes, it's not going to seem like a problem. At 10 minutes, that leak is not going to seem like a problem. At 57 or 58 minutes, you're going to realize that you're in big trouble and you're about to drown. And that's the nature of exponential growth, and that's what the bankers have foisted upon us. And I do resent the hell out of them for that. I mean, because it's not sustainable. It's going to end. The current system is going to end during my expected lifetime and during most of your expected lifetimes as well. And what you see with the immigration is just a symptom of that. It's just because bankers wanted to make money, so they came up with an unsustainable Ponzi scheme and foisted it upon the world. And governments saw that and said, shit, we can promise all sorts of benefits to everybody, and promised all sorts of benefits to everybody. Population stops growing, and now everybody's saying, oh shit, what the hell do we do? Our Ponzi scheme's going to fucking collapse. We need to restart the growth. Let's let the fucking immigrants in. That's what this is. I may have made it sound complex while going through this paper, but that's what it boils down to. It's governments and bankers trying to prop up a fucking Ponzi scheme, so let the immigrants in so that we can skim off of them too. Turns out the immigrants are a net drag on the economy, but I guess what? Tough shit. Have a nice day.